Hi everyone, this is Arpad from the YouTube channel Starpath Academy, and today my guest is one of my favorite people to talk to, Lynette Zhang, CEO and founder of Zhang Enterprises. She's an economist with decades of experience in banking and precious metals, and she's an expert in currency life cycles. Lynette, thank you very much for coming on to the show.
Arpad, anytime. You also are one of my very favorite people on the planet. I can say true.
Thank you very much. I really enjoy our conversations, and I have so many topics prepared in my head and on notes. But before we do that, let's start with the most important one. How are you doing? How is your family doing? And what are you up to lately?
Well, we are all doing, thank you so much for asking. We are fortunately, knock on wood, all doing, quite well and just really being vigilant, paying attention because there's so many things that are going on. But we should never forget to live our lives in the meantime, too.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I think when you look at the news and what's going on, it really scares us. And people are scared and people do dumb stuff when they're scared. So it's very important for us to focus back on our own life and what we control. And how was your garden? Before we go into gold and the BRICS and current events, first of all, how is your garden and what have you been planting lately and what are your plans for next year?
Well, wow. The garden it's been cooling off here, but then we're getting like a little warm spell. So the plants are a little confused, and we happen to have an awful lot of squash blossoms right now.
That's nice.
Right. So there's a lot of things, zucchini, and I think we've got some cucumbers. We've got some Egyptian spinach. I've been eating a lot of that because that's nice. It goes through the heat of the summer, which in Arizona, there's a lot of.
Right.
We've got, let's see, what's the fruit? It looks like my pecans are coming due and the pomegranates are coming.
Beautiful.
I've been eating melons. They've been so delicious. So in Arizona, we're pretty lucky to have a 12-month grow season.
Wow. Yeah.
Varies what we can do, but now we're going into the cold snap, right? So that would
Yeah.
broccoli, cauliflower, bok choy, celeries, lettuces, things like that, tomatoes that we're planting now.
Great. Great to hear. And you mentioned one thing I really like about you is that you also think about community and you put community first and you have a little piece of the garden where of that crop you share with others. And can you explain how that works? Because I've been trying to focus more and more community lately, and you've been building a community. So, how do you share the garden or the workload, or how do you come together and do the work together? That's kind of so amazing for me.
Well, the work is a little bit more challenging, though we love it when people volunteer because there's always something to be done on the farm. But
Right.
basically, I'm on a pretty prominent corner in my neighborhood, which is in dead central Phoenix. And so I actually planted out the entire exterior of the property. And then this happens to be a very walkable neighborhood. So we have signs that are up, what should be planted now, but also we've let our neighbors know that they're very welcome to pick a pomegranate or a zucchini or come in and get like the fresh curry leaves or the kefir lime leaves. And so they do. And it's something that we encourage. Primarily because as you said earlier, Arpad, a lot of people, there's a lot of crazy things that are going on, and people are going crazy and not thinking strategically. Let me put it.
Yes.
And I do believe what we're asking people to do is to have a paradigm shift, which means that they have to accept the fact that what they've been taught is money since the day they were born and the way everything is supposed to work is a lie. And that's very hard for people to do. And I can't get upset with them when they don't get it because our government formalized the perception management tools
Right.
early 80s, and they've only gotten better since then. They hire the most brilliant minds on how do we spin this. It's just like the recent Central Bank of Canada, right? Dropped the interest rates 50 basis points. And what did they say in the headlines? Bank of Canada sticks the soft landing. No, that is really a sign of fear that they are losing control of the deflation, that because things are so overvalued, they're imploding under their own weight. And so what they have to do is create a whole bunch more of this and create even more inflation to fight that deflation. It's a sign of weakness. It's a sign that what they're doing isn't working. It's not a sign of them sticking that soft landing.
That's a great point. Perception management, exactly. Now, I wanted to ask a couple of questions, but this is a great lead into. So I do have a Telegram community, and I asked people, hey, Lynette Zhang is coming onto the channel. So I'm going to start with a few questions from there. And Salvatore asked there, what do you anticipate? A depression for the elites to gather up the assets on a fire sale and then followed by hyperinflation? Or do you think it's just going to be straight hyperinflation? Or what is to come from your point of view? Because you've been spot on, detecting on what's to come and what is usually the action taken by the elites.
Right. Well, first of all, I do believe that we are already at the beginning stages of the hyperinflation, as primarily witnessed by the velocity of money, how quickly money changes hands, because that's definitely an indication that people are not comfortable
Yes.
holding on to this crap because they see it's losing its value very quickly. So I'm definitely of the camp that we are already there. And then recently, where we had all the key central banks, like I just was talking about Bank of Canada, but the Federal Reserve did it, the ECB did it, I think the Bank of England did it, where they dropped interest rates to a much larger degree, which to me is signaling that they are ready for the higher inflation. Because there's only one way to fight deflation, and that's with inflation. And the only difference between the inflation that they control at that 2% and hyperinflation is the speed of that inflation. So by these global central banks dropping at 50 basis points, which is a lot, that is a lot. That shows fear. That shows the deflationary pressures. Basically, it seems to me like the central banks are ushering in the hyperinflationary event. And I do think that we will see a hyperinflationary depression. And I think we're already seeing it in different parts of the world, that this is coming to pass as more and more countries are dealing with that high inflation. And the central banks, well, what do they have? I mean, interest rates are the key tool that they have to regulate the rate and speed of inflation. But what do you do when you've already removed all the purchasing power from the currency, right? You have to attack principal.
Exactly. It's really their only tool, right? The cost of money, making that cheaper. And when they fight something, is just creating more paper out of thin air. But the value produced by society doesn't increase at that rate. So, of course, it's completely crazy, but they somehow think that this is going to work this time, right? That's always I don't know, or I mean, at some point you have to really question, are they this crazy, or is this malicious and doing it to usher in a new system? Previously, before we started the interview, you showed us the two different currencies that look exactly the same, but they are very, very different. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I can, and it's really so interesting how they make that transition, because if they keep it seeming as normal as possible, people don't realize that anything has changed. So this is a $20 gold piece. They went from this to this, a $20 gold certificate, And you can see how they had that gold on there so that people believe that,
Right.
okay, well, and you could take this into the bank and walk out with this. So they transition. How much more convenient it is to carry a bill rather than, oh, this heavy coin, boo hoo hoo, right? So then they went from that into that. Okay, look at how close they look. All that's different is that little gold certificate, but the rest of it looks the same. So people
Right.
didn't realize the transition. This was after 33. And then we were talking about 1971 when Nixon officially took us off the gold standard. And can you tell the difference between this one that's pre 71 and this one that's after? No, they look they're identical. So
Yeah.
this was one of the things that they knew when they set the system up, is that people marry the legal money of the state. And they cannot help but believe that at some point it will regain some of its past purchasing power. But it never ever does, because people need to understand that inflation is part of the design of the government-based system. And where this is a savings-based money, and so is this. I mean, it takes energy and labor to pull this out of the ground and refine it. And there's a finite amount of it. I mean, all the gold that's ever been mined in history, and including the gold that's yet in the ground, fits into one Olympic-sized swimming pool, right? How much of this stuff is out there?
Not even to talk about the digital counterpart of it is really just a number on a screen that people
Exactly.
say it is that they can type out. Well, with that and the currency differences, I feel like it's always like at the end of a cycle, just like in, I guess, the 71, or then came the 80s, right? And the high inflation period. There's always some kind of global event that either can be used as an excuse
Right.
of either war outside Vietnam, or in the 20s, the First World War, then the Second World War. That kind of scares people. But before we go in there, we want to make sure we let at least a little light into the tunnel. So how can people, you just showed, right? It was at the end, it was their choice which one to hold, right? What
Yeah.
can we do as regular good old people to make sure that we don't get into the grinder of these big currency changes? Can you give us a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel before we go into geopolitics?
Absolutely. And I want to go back to a little something that you said, which the wealth transfer to the wealthy. This is a wealth transfer mechanism. Inflation is a wealth transfer mechanism. But guess what? It's for everybody. And
Right.
that's into the preparation, because if you hold on to this, you automatically know that you're losing your purchasing power. I mean, what a $20 bill would buy you. Well, 1971, average wage was $10,500, or I think something like 285 ounces of gold. Right. Today, the average wage is like 59,000, and a family of four could live on that $10,500. But today's average wage is like 59,000. And even at, what did they stimulate? Underneath to less than 250,000 a year. So that's an indication of that extreme loss of purchasing power. Because if you never got a raise, but you were paid in the same amount of gold, that's something like 600,000 a year right now. And a family of four could still live
Oh, yeah.
comfortably on that. That's not going to be true going into the future. Like, we both have that Zimbabwe note, right? Probably have a $10 trillion Zimbabwe note, and that's a great company or country to talk about right now because of their experiment. But what you can do is you can convert this into this again, right? And that's what we really need to do, is to become our own central bank, but also to be as independent and self-sufficient as possible. So where we were talking about the gardens to begin with, food becomes the single biggest issue for people. And aren't we seeing that all around the world right now, including in the good old USA? So it isn't any different. So it's food. You need to generate security in all of these areas. And then, of course, there's sub areas. But food, water, energy, security, barterability, wealth preservation, community, and shelter. And yes, community has arguably risen to the very top of my list, because I've been preparing and prepping really since 2008, when I knew the system died. And I'm not
Right.
a gardener by nature. I'm not a farmer by nature. I am now, because I wanted to make sure that I could feed as many people as possible. First, it just started with my family, but I don't know how to do things in a small
Well,
way.
the goodwill flows, and as I think we set examples, so that's how we can probably change from the inside out, at least in the country, at our families, neighbors, and then um, their neighbors, and so on. I think that's the only probably way. Now, you had some really good point that it was up to the people, right, to either stay in the currency system or to step outside of it and become their central bank. And with that would come a second community question from my Telegram channel, which is perfectly flows into the topic, would be Matthew asks, well, what do you think, how much gold and silver is enough? So for instance, and this is of course relative, and we don't want to give exact answers to anyone because we don't know your lives, right? But for instance, someone who still has plans, needs to invest, needs to grow maybe his company, or needs to still grow, what is the percentage wise or amount wise of gold and silver that they could make sure that use it as like a security reserve, or how much is enough basically?
Well, it's going to vary circumstance to circumstance. And it's also going to vary in a way, whether we're talking about a business, right?
Hmm.
Or an individual. So there is definitely overlap there. But keeping in mind that through the spot market, that is a tool that is easily and cheaply manipulated to suppress the visible price of gold, because a rising price of gold is an indication of a failing currency. And they don't want you to understand that the currency is failing. So they suppress it. And because they suppress it, and at the same time, they're buying more than they ever have historically since they started keeping records of central bank gold buying, what that really tells you is that they are buying money that they know is severely undervalued. And at the end of the day, they have to do the revaluation when they take something like this that has no intrinsic value, is used in one place, and they revalue it against gold, which is the primary currency metal. And then that's when gold goes near its fundamental value in terms of this, because it's always a true value and a store of value over time, even though anything can happen on a short-term basis because of the manipulation. So what you want to do, whether you're an individual or a corporation, is sit down and define exactly what you're trying to accomplish. So
Very good point.
for an individual, what you can do with gold and silver is, number one, you can sustain your current standard of living. And so to know how much gold and silver you need, you look at the true fundamental value. How much, if they were going to do an overnight revaluation today on a one-to-one basis, what is that number?
Hmm.
And then depending upon your current cost of living and what you have to protect, and also how you want to grow, would determine the different types of silver and the different types of gold that you buy. So if there's a part like for me personally, all right, I'm running a business and that means I have employees and I want to, no matter what happens, I need real money that's outside of the system so that I can always pay my employees. Well, this is actually the tool that I used. It's a savings-based tool, and it's based upon the amount of what the salaries are, how much I'm going to have to put out. And it's also based on a certain time frame. So my personal level of comfort with that is 12 months. But, again, you're going to define that.
Right.
So it'll be different for you than it is for me. It also, frankly, includes a layer of cash as your first line of defense, because that's going to be most recognizable to begin with. So it really kind of boils down to, what do you need for day-to-day purchases? To put gas in the car, to buy a thing of strawberries for your day-to-day thing. Then what I like, is a variety of pre-64 silver, dimes, quarters, half dollars, dollars. I don't mind even new silver because I'm not so concerned about confiscation around silver. So you want a variety of sizes. And I personally have a tendency to like to go to the smaller denominations and have more of those. I have all of them, but more of those, only because it's easier to put two dimes together than to break a quarter in half.
Yeah.
So that also opens the door to whatever budget you have, right? So you don't have to have a tremendous amount of money for a buy-in, because what I also like people to understand is that gold and silver in any form is monetary at its base. And frankly, Arpad, you know this even better than I do, having lived through the hyperinflationary event. So anybody of any budget can build a sound money strategy, and it needs to be built in layers, and it needs to be based on what it is you're trying to accomplish. Going back to business, let's say you have a bunch of rental property as example. Well, real estate runs a number of risks, but if you're generating your income from that real estate and they put caps on that income, which is typical, and even what we saw back in 2020, right? So your costs continue to go up, but you're no longer able to use your rent to generate the money that you need. Well, that's part of the strategy as well. So there's no real preconceived notion, but it is based, the sound money strategy that we execute is based upon repeatable patterns, what typically happens. It's based on layers. So wherever we are in this trend, you have the right tool for the job, and it puts your goals first. And that's how you do it. And you become part of a community. So you have all those other security pieces put together as well.
Great points made there. You reminded me of my childhood when we were out at the riverbank. And for some reason, this was a place where people set up to sell off their stuff, right? During hyperinflation, whatever they had. And I remember seeing people selling off silverware, and it was very, very expensive. It was kind of a savings note that if you made money during hyperinflation, you could turn it into silverware, or if you had silverware, because we didn't really have much, right? Coming out of communism, we didn't have gold coins or silver coins, but people did use silverware. And they learned very fast how to identify fake ones by weight, by sound. It was quite interesting to see and remember. It's funny that you have it. But great points there. Now, with that said, do you see another community questions from my Telegram channel is, what are the chances that gold and silver become money again, and we go back to constitutional money, or the way it maybe was supposed to be from the get-go? Do you guys see a chance for that happening?
Well, what historically happens 100% of the time, so this is something that I can say with a high level of confidence, that gold will be brought back into the monetary system, because when all confidence in those that are currently in power in the monetary system through that hyperinflationary depression. I mean, we can look at Zimbabwe, and what did they do? They came up with Zim Gold that's supposed to be backed, but it's non-convertible. And boy, they did an overnight revaluation, 5-6 months after they came out with that brand new Zimbabwe gold, right? So gold will become a component of the new money because they're going to have to do that in order to get people's confidence back in there. However, I cannot stress this strongly enough because this is the battle that I see. We must, inside of the new monetary system, it must be convertible, because if it is not, in other words, you can walk in with this and walk out with this. That's what I mean by convertible, because if not, just like in Zimbabwe, what guarantee was there that all of the gold to back all of the currency is there? There's no guarantee. And in fact, if it truly was backed, they couldn't have done that overnight revaluation. So we need to, I think, demand honesty in our monetary system. And what are you going to do? Trust their promises again? Because they've just taken such good care of our monetary system and they care so much about the public. Or are we going to give ourselves a tool to hold their toes to the fire? And that is convertibility, not promises. Promises, thank you, Zimbabwe. You know, promises don't mean anything from these guys whose job it is to lie, and then let's lie some more, because they want to transfer your work, your efforts, your wealth their way. And gold would prevent that. Convertible gold would prevent that. I'm not saying on a one-to-one basis, although we could, but I don't think we'd see that. And it doesn't matter, because what is the argument? Oh, there's not enough gold to do that. There's plenty of gold to do that. We've got an entire Olympic-sized swimming pool. It's what
the right price, yeah.
In terms of this.
Right. So I tend to agree. When I look at history, it always goes back to gold whenever everything else fails. But before it fails, there's definitely tricks and schemes that they try before that, right? Now, with that said, also you made a great point on the amount or the smaller coinage, because I want to just add this for the viewers. I remember a gold chain of 14 grams was 2 million Romanian lei back in hyperinflation, and a house cost was about 4 million. That was a 2.5 acre house with land and everything else. So you need smaller amounts, because if you need to do small changes, like barter, you want to make sure that you can deliver small amounts. And if you look at the videos from Zimbabwe and they have the little pouches, there's always like tiny pieces of gold or silver that they use. So very good point there as well.
It's important.
Yeah. So what I wanted to go back to is that before they are forced back to gold and real money, they always try something, right? And the next big promise is now CBDCs and CBDCs, and this new money centrally guaranteed. Do you think that will be kind of a trick into CBDCs when everything else fails, or do you feel like CBDC will fail out of the gate?
Well, I do think, you know, when I'm watching the evolution of the CBDCs, one thing that I find so interesting is that those countries that have tried getting their population to use it in a more independent way have not had great success. Yes, if they give them these free CBDCs, they will spend that money, but then they're not taking money to put back into the CBDCs. So the CBDCs are being forced onto the public, who clearly, frankly, they don't want them. But they've also told us how they would introduce those CBDCs to the masses. So they are generating a hyperinflationary event. I mean, I really wish I could say something different, but when you have no purchasing power left and you're out of tools, and the markets, all of the markets, stocks, bonds, real estate, and all of those big huge bets that are done on top of that stuff, they're all wanting to implode in their own weight. They have to reflate that. That's what the announcements recently are about, and that's what takes us into the hyperinflation. And if we have a big enough crisis, then they will shove those down our throats. And
They will definitely try for sure.
right. And that's why, it's not just the local community. I mean, I see the global community as being equally important as the local community. The local community can help secure your current needs, your food, water, etc. But the global community has to come together and create a quiet revolution just by converting their fiat money into gold and silver. And I think, and I don't know this for sure, but I think that if we can get 3% of the population to be converting their fiat into gold and silver, that we could get into a position where they'd have to give us a seat at the table. In other words, they'd have to hear our voice. We have to be big enough and strong enough for them to hear our voice, that we want a convertible sound money, even if it has a basket of the other currencies and this only backs it 10% or 20% or whatever that number is. I don't care, because I don't give a crap about these things, but I want the ability to pull the gold out of the system, because that is what holds the politicians and the central banks' toes to the fire. And if we don't have that, it really isn't going to matter what the new system is. You're going to be, I'm sorry, bend over. Because none of this is going to be for your best interest. This is going into a full surveillance, full control economy. Is that what you want? I mean, you came out of communism. Is that what you want?
It's crazy how people get fooled into the same tricks again and again. 20 year passes, 25, and they'll forget it. And it's just the next shiny thing with the next best promise, and people fall for it. But that's where it really goes back to, is it's a race against time, and they're coming out with new options for us, and how many people we can wake up. That's where it really is. I do believe that if enough people wake up and just know about fiat currency, what it is and what kind of big scam it is, then knowledge is power. And then of course, with the local community being able to back you, and you being living a more wholesome life and not being afraid, is where the system changes. But we do have to get to that critical mass of people waking up and holding real currency. And those are really great points. Now, on the topic of global currencies, right, and the US dollar being, the global reserve currency, and BRICS just happened. You had a really great video. I encourage everyone to check out your YouTube channel. We're going to have a link below. Really great key points. Can you repeat some of those that you made of what happened during the BRICS meeting? And then I'll have a follow-up question. But just like a few things changed that seem minor, but they're really historic changes, and they are foreshadowing something big. At least that's how I feel.
Yeah. And I feel that way too. And a lot of people I see kind of hanging their hat on, when will the BRICS nation announce their new currency that's backed 40% by gold, which it isn't. It's pegged, and they haven't done any announcements. And what the BRICS nations are really trying to do is to create a mutual cross-border payment system. Right. And so, but I'm glad you brought the BRICS up, because for me, it's not about when are they bringing out the unit, right? That's the name of their potential new money. They brought out a symbolic bill, but not a total bill. And in theory, the unit is made up of a basket of currencies that are all members of the BRICS nations with a component of gold. But again, it's pegged. If you can't convert it, it's not backed by anything. Please, 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 they'll use that word. They're not interchangeable, right? That means they're pegged and they're just tied to the current Wall Street system that can manipulate the price. But having said that, and then the other part that it's important for people to understand in this whole power shift piece that's going on, you have Saudi Arabia and you have India that have been straddling the fence between the East and the West for a very long time and they don't really know which is going to be the winner in here. So what was strategic, though, is especially Saudi Arabia has not actually accepted the appointment to the BRICS. That will be critical if and when they do, because that's the petrodollar. And that would be the final death knell to the petrodollar. And that's critical because that's why the US dollar remained holding its status as the world reserve currency, which actually hasn't really been true since 2000, but it still has the title. The bigger piece in here was that Russia, Russia was able to negotiate a truce between China, the argument that China and India has had on their borders. And that's huge because India, although having been part of the BRICS since the beginning, is also part of a consortium made up of the Western countries, or the Eastern countries, Western countries, to fight China's dominance. So they're in both of those camps. And the reason why some believe, and I would be in this camp, frankly, is for a much more strategic move with China in their attempt to take over control of Taiwan, which has been really a friction point between China and the US. And I think also some of these proxy wars, Ukraine versus Russia, et cetera. And so it's the shift in power. It's the transition in power. It's the building out of the new plumbing for the global financial system. But the currency they're talking about is still just a small basket of currencies and would not be any more inclusive than the dollar is. So therefore, that system is not going to be any more inclusive than the SWIFT system, which we have used and abused. I think it's more likely to come from the IMF and the SDR, which is the internal currency. They have discussed having a component of gold in there, but it could really—
I was about to mention that, yeah.
So that would be like more, that's the issue that I see around this. Well, one of them is that it's not universal enough. They need to be speaking about it in a much larger, broader, universal language and inclusion. So until we can really kind of satisfy that, which the only currency that I see that can do that is the SDR, controlled by the IMF. And so I think if they have their druthers, this is not my druther, but if they have their druthers, then even though we'll see a local currency, like we'll still have the US dollar, but the reality is we really will be guided by that global currency, all unelected officials. We have to come together globally and vote with our wallets and say, no, 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 no. We have to have a say in it, or it's going to be way worse than what we've dealt with so far.
Very good points. People put false hopes into these, I guess, apparitions of, oh, well, the BRICS do this. Well, the thing is that the US empire is not doing well. And while it did what it did, while it's still lasting, I'm not sure people should be looking forward too much to, a China-led world. There are not, they're not necessarily the beacons of liberty that you would be probably wanting in the future world. Now they might change, right? And the Chinese people are great, but right now I'm not sure that you should be looking forward to anything. So you do have to rely on yourself and your own community and, maybe some guidance above instead of, oh, well, if you listen closely enough, like the IMF had this basket of currency for how long, right? And even if they put gold into it, as you said, people forget that pegged is not the same as interchangeable. The Libyan lira was pegged to the US dollar, right? Not the Libyan, the Lebanese. The Lebanese, that was pegged. Pegged or that basically means nothing. It's still it maybe a vague promise while people believe in it. As soon as they stop believing it, it's immediately broken. So do
Exactly.
not rely on these, mirages. Yes, it's just sign of change, but you need to make sure that, you follow something more solid. Yeah.
Well, that's why, I mean, this could be a ridiculously lofty goal. I don't know, because really I'm just one person and who am I, right? But the reality is there's 8.4 billion people in this world. So there are more of us than there are of these elites. And if we can come together on a global basis, because everything is divide and conquer, right? Pointing
Very
fingers,
good point. Yeah.
creating these false enemies. Oh, I don't like you because of this, or you're not good because of that. It's just a distraction. It's a misdirection so that we don't see what they're doing to take away our liberties. And I've been on this planet long enough to watch those liberties evaporate, quite honestly. I don't like the fact that I had more freedoms than my granddaughter, who's 9, has. That bothers me so much. But it's not just that freedom, it's how we've been robbed. I mean, it's incredible to me that people believe that they have the right to abuse us in this way. We've got to take our power back, Arpad. We just have to. We have to do it for the generations that are behind us.
Very good point. So I do believe that you touched on some really great things about Saudi Arabia. Also don't forget Turkey, right? Turkey is like the epitome of both feet in both places, right? Playing very smart global politics from that end when it comes to that. However, yeah, it's just it's fun to pay attention. It's great to pay attention. You need to pay attention for planning your future, but hope needs to come from you and your community, right?
Yeah.
And enforcing a new standard, as ideas spread, enforcing new beliefs in what the world needs to come. If you think about like how the Gutenberg press changed the world, like we have the internet now. We need to share ideas as fast as possible, and we need to keep searching for common ground because, as you said, it's perfectly pointed out. There's always some conflict, either in the Middle East, and you have to pick a side, or if not, then you're the devil. Or if you pick the wrong side, then you're the devil. Oh, you didn't pick a side at Ukraine? Like you have to because we demand it. Like, what about like I don't have enough information to pick a side. I just want, let's focus on things that we agree on. Like peace is good, right? Like let's start from the very basic concepts and let's work from there and then focus on our future liberties that are at more and more at stake and been chipped away for the last I don't know how many years. Yeah, so really great points there. Now, people would say that, hey, the gold, yes, perfect. However, oh my gosh, it's at record highs. Like, is it safe? People have been the media has been bashing gold for such a long time, right? And they've been calling from pet rocks to like anything and everything. Just don't focus on that because no, you need to be in this space. And then if you look at it, oh, the past year it has gone up what 38, 40%, right? But you should not pay attention to that. Or if you do pay attention to that, oh, look at it, it's very risky, it's too high, right? What would be your response to gold is too expensive now?
Well, I think whether you're looking at gold or you're looking at stocks, which are denominated in this, I think it's critically important for everybody to understand the true value, the fundamental value of any asset or any instrument. Because unless you know what that number is, you do not know whether it's undervalued, fairly valued, or overvalued. Therefore, do I want to buy it? Do I want to hold it? Do I want to liquidate it? So I think the first thing that you look at is, well, how do you know what the true value of an ounce of gold is? Goodness gracious. Well, gold is sound money. It's the primary currency metal, and there's a finite amount of it. This is also fiat money. So you could say it's the flip side of the coin, sound money to fiat money. There's an unlimited amount of this because it's based on how much debt there is. Now, here in the US, they took away the M3, which is all the money that they're creating. Not that it was probably completely honest anyway, but they took that away from us in 2006. Why in the world would we need to know what that is? So the way that I come to it, since in this system, money is created from debt, you take all the debt that's been created, and I go global with it. You can do a country to country, but this is a global issue. So you take all of the debt that's ever been created, and that's a proxy for how much money is out there. And then you just divide that by all the gold that has ever been mined and also the gold that is yet in ground. And the Department of the Interior runs that report on an annual basis. They do it for both gold and for silver. And so if you just divide all the debt by all the gold, then you're somewhere north of $40,000 an ounce, which sounds outrageous. And I get that it sounds outrageous. But I'm pretty sure if you went back to somebody when this was $20 and said, you know, one of these days this is going to be $2,700, that also would have sounded outrageous, right? So it is about the value of the dollar. So yeah, once you're clear on how much that is, do you care if it's at 27 or 28 or 5,000 or 10,000 or 20,000 or 30,000? No, it's undervalued, right?
Yeah.
Very simple. And the more
Very
of the
good.
money printing that they do, the higher that number goes. But I know I have a 10 trillion, here it is, a $10 trillion Zimbabwe note that I can buy absolutely nothing with. So the numbers don't really matter because let me tell you, when gold goes to $40,000 on the spot market, you are not going to want to convert it into those dollars unless it's to convert it into the dollars and then convert it into income producing assets or convert it into something else. Because at that point, you are crystal clear on the fact that it has no value. And if you don't believe me, go to the Federal Reserve Education Department, the FRED, FRED, and in that search bar, put purchasing power of the consumer dollar. And what you're going to see on that chart and graph is a big fat zero. So, and you'll see a consistent march in terms of purchasing power to that zero.
That's a good point. Like, if you think about it, right? Back to the Future movie, I really like it. So if you go back and you would tell someone, hey, this $20 coin is going to be over $2,700, it would feel crazy, right? Yet here it is, and that's more than 100x, right? So if you think about it, 100x in a, especially in a currency event, is basically nothing. You know, so like the $50,000, $40,000 value to it is just really a number, and it's really not outrageous when you think about it. And I went through it, right? So I know it's just really a number. And what I also tell people is to measure it against something other. So to kind of recognize, okay, well, how much silver do you need to purchase groceries, right? So
Gasoline.
and if you think about it, groceries outpace the stock market, right? So like you're not doing the right math because you're all comparing it to a currency unit that is sinking, and it's sinking very fast. So it's very interesting points that you made there. Yeah. Well, also just to visualize, I like to visualize this, and I probably don't get the numbers right, but I did once, like just the amount of aid that we sent to Ukraine is 1.8 billion or something. I'm sure I'm getting it wrong, but even if you just take a look at $100 billion, if you would stack $100 bills on top like this, it would go to the twice the International Space Station, and that is the paper that you're hoarding. Like, do you even have like a concept of how much we're spending monthly on a US budget for government budget? And yet that is like what we have so few of. Like some people out in the world, they are struggling to buy groceries, yet here we are, right? Spending like there is no future until there is no future, because that's what we're doing, right? There's no fiscal responsibility, yet we spend so much on things that we have no control over or no say over. It's crazy. So that's the, like when you zoom out and you have the concept, it really is different. Sorry, you were saying something.
I think, Arpad, that when people are listening to the government sending this to Ukraine and spending this on this and blah, 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 we don't realize that they're actually spending our money.
Yes.
It's our that they're spending, our tax dollars, and taxes have to go up. It's just the way that it is because that's the way governments work. They tax and they spend. So there are a few things in that, but again, it goes back to having a convertible money. Because back in the day when we had the gold certificates, if you didn't like what the government was doing, you pulled the gold out of the system. And that created more restrictions around what they could do. That's why they had to take the gold away from us. And again, they had to take it away, the ability to convert dollars into gold. They had to take it away from the countries in 71 because there was a run on the dollar in the 60s because we were exporting. We defaulted on our promise. We reneged on our promise of Bretton Woods to maintain the dollar's value of 35 to 1 ounce of gold. It's not the dollar being important, it was the maintaining of its purchasing power that was supposed to be important. But war has always been a fabulous excuse for governments to inflate more money. And I'd also like to point out, and it's interesting because if you listen to the talking heads on Bloomberg or CNBC or any of those guys, take your pick, well, they'll talk about gold being really expensive right now. And they might say something a little bit about the stocks, but they also say the stocks are going to keep going up,
Yeah.
right? So they create FOMO, fear of missing out, in the area that best benefits Wall Street. Because if you keep your wealth in the stock market through, it doesn't matter what it is, it could be stocks, bonds, ETFs, mutual funds, annuities, CDs, any of that stuff. If you don't hold it, you don't own it. And it is just that simple. And so we have to take our power back, but that's the point of having a currency. And if enough of us do this, we've got a shot at it. I believe we have a shot at it, where we have to have the ability to hold the toes to the fire. What's going to do that? Only a convertible currency. Promises don't work. They don't mean anything, especially when you're taking promises from liars.
We are so detached. People are so detached from reality. Is it's not even funny anymore. If you think that you have your phone and there's a number there, that means you own a stock. But like, can you just talk about another video you made? A really great point where you mentioned that back in the day you used to have at least a certificate, so it was a contract. I'm saying contract, of course,
What?
between you and the company or the stock or the bond, that this is you. But right now it's really, well, you have an account at this company and they secure this for you, but you don't even own that. But it turns out they don't even own that because there's a company in New York in the basement and they own everything. And we're just like transferring title, but it's not even that. It's super crazy. Can you talk about like the difference between actually holding a bond or actually holding a stock, or instead of what's happening now?
Oh yeah. I mean, one of the things that I love about being 70, and I just turned 70, all of the history that I've lived through. And it's like amazing because I became a stockbroker in 1986, but I was a teenager in the 60s and going into the 70s. So I can't say that I absolutely understood what was going on then, but I certainly have come to, I had those experiences. And it was in the 70s after Nixon handed over control to the central bankers that everything started to shift. So to your point, prior to then, yeah, you bought a bond. It was a bearer bond, so it had coupons on it. You held the certificate, and whoever held it owned it. And then you would clip a coupon, send it in. They would send you the payment, or you would take physical possession of the stock certificates. So they were outside of the system, and you're absolutely right. It was a contract agreement between you and the company and whoever's the bond was, whether it's a government, etc. And no middleman there. But in the 70s, there, and prior to that, there were also more corporate pensions, right? Where back in those days, you worked for a company for 30 years because they guaranteed you what your income was going to be thereafter. But all of that started to change once the central banks were in control. And when I became a stockbroker in the 80s, all the talk was about globalization. And I remember thinking, I can see some problems with this. And in the US, what did we do? We shipped out all the jobs. Now we're trying to recreate that again. But it was the globalization. But the real focus was assets in house. That's exactly the term they used. And you got bonuses for getting the people to not take possession of the certificates, to hold them in their accounts. And the reason why they wanted to do that was because then what you become is a beneficial owner, not a legal owner. And so you're down at the bottom of this totem pole. Yale University did a great flowchart study on it. And up at the top, all assets are legally owned by DTC or DTCC. It's the same company that's all owned by the big banks, right? So they are actually the legal registered owner. No longer can you get a bearer bond, and they're eliminating your ability to take a stock certificate because they want that wealth held in those accounts because you're not the only beneficial owner. They are the only legal owner, but all of the banks and the subsidiaries of those banks in between them and you are also beneficial owners. And if they choose to do the contracts in the City of London, which most of them are written in the City of London, there are no limitations to how many times your equity can be used, an unlimited amount of times, to borrow. And then those banks and those subsidiaries can go out and they can do derivatives. They can do whatever they want with that money, right? And think about 2008. What happened was despicable, disgusting, evil, horrendous. Do any of you remember that? It wasn't that long ago, but people's memory kind of fade. But do you remember how every time you went to the grocery store, prices were noticeably higher? Do you remember how many people lost their homes? Do you remember how many people lost their jobs and their positions? But nobody went to jail. Why? Because what they did was not illegal, because guess who writes the contracts? And you don't read the contracts. So, you don't own anything. If you don't hold it, you don't own it. And it is all counterparty risk. Any contract is only as good as the counterparty to that contract. And if they can't pay, you look at all those insurance contracts and people go, but it's insured. Well, read your contract. And what it's going to tell you, it's based on the claims paying ability of the company.
Of course.
If the company can't pay the claim, guarantee means absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. So yes, they've transitioned us away from ownership, right? They've turned everything, they meaning Wall Street, have turned all assets into trading assets, trading instruments. And, by the way, one of the things that we haven't talked about, and I didn't even think about this until this moment, so I don't know why it popped in, but it's an important point. A week ago, last Friday, I don't know when this is going to air, but another bank went out. It was a small bank in Kansas City or something like that. And of course, they did it on Friday after the close, and then people got notification on Saturday. Now, what makes this particular bank failure interesting? Small bank, you might not have even heard about it. It was probably barely a blip anywhere. But what makes this particularly interesting is the fact that, yes, the insured deposits up to that 250 are fine, but this time they only paid out 50% of the uninsured deposits. Every other time, so the earlier bank failure this year and the bank failures last year, even the uninsured deposits, everybody was made whole. So I think that they're setting a precedence for a larger bank to go out, because who's complaining about this? And they are working on reforming the FDIC and blah, 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 that insurance. I mean, it's just a gimmick that was put in 33 to lull you into a false sense of security so that you'd use the banking system again. But there will be bail-ins, make no mistake about it. No mistake at all.
Another Cyprus event. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Cyprus was the test, right?
Yeah.
First ran it without any deposit insurance, but the whole world went up in arms. And so then they backed off, and right after and honored the deposit insurance, which was 100,000 euros. And then right after that, the Bank for International Settlements came out with how to bail in an institution with or without deposit insurance over a weekend. So they've got the blueprint. You think they're not going to use it? But they're testing it. I think the reason why we haven't seen this up to this point is because I don't feel that those in power are ready for people to realize that their funds will be bailed in. But I also want to point out the importance of having a diversified bank account.
Mm-hmm.
We ran into some troubles, and thank God we were diversified, or quite honestly, ARPAD, we would have been shut down if I was on that one bank account. So diversification is huge amongst banks. Better have more than one account. People
That's a great point.
Well, it's not.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Before we take it home, give us 3 action steps as a little hope. What should the average person do to make sure that he stays safe and maybe even profit from what's to come?
Yeah, I mean,
2 action steps, so we give them hope, because honestly, just like how in life, with everything, opportunities come hidden usually as something else. But then for the people who are not afraid, who take chances, and who have a positive mindset, these are the times that they can truly make a difference in their family and for what's to come.
Absolutely. And I would say this is an opportunity to make a real positive difference in the world. So you need to look at your current circumstances and step back, and that whole mantra piece, how is your security in food, water, energy, security itself, barterability, which for me is silver, wealth preservation, which for me is gold, that community, do you have a community around you, and shelter? And how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So you step back and you say, where do I feel the most vulnerable? And then you go in and you do something in that area so that you're not as vulnerable. And then you step back again. and you say, okay, where do I feel the most vulnerable? So you need to consistently be working to shore up those areas where you are vulnerable. But I also do feel like it's critically important to build that local community around you. And you can do that by going to the farmers markets and the community gardens, meet people that are growing and creating your food and give them some time. Learn a new skill because that skill is also barterable. Okay. So it's critically important. Learn how to lay irrigation, learn how to build soil. I mean, go in and create those local relationships, but also on a local basis, because the government and the central banks are not going to step in and say, you know what? We've really screwed you enough. We're going to let you keep your wealth. We're going to make the new one good. And if you believe them, I have a bridge in Brooklyn. Rather,
Right. As the people who were affected by Helene,
yeah. And
hurricane.
so, have a local plan, which I'm still kind of figuring this out, to be perfectly honest with you. But there are organizations, sound money organizations, that are working on state level, so grassroots level legislation to legalize gold and silver. And one thing that gave me a lot of hope was when I saw President Biden change the status of marijuana. And why did he do that? He did that because the states had already done it. So we aren't going to have an easy time having an impact on a federal level, but perhaps on a state level, we can have a stronger voice. So I think we need to use our voices, and we need to let our legislatures know that we want a sound money program in our state. And then just convert fiat into this in any form that you can, because that's your vote. That's my vote. I don't trust the government. I don't trust the Federal Reserve. I'm not seeing that they're doing anything that is in mine or my children's best interest. But in gold and silver, that I trust.
Well, thank you very much. Lynette, where could our viewers find you, and what's the best way to contact you?
Well, I'm very, very visible on YouTube and Twitter at the Lynette Zhang, and on Instagram and Facebook at Lynette Zhang. So you can watch all of my work there. We keep you in the loop. And also our website, which is LynetteZhang.com. And we love personal interactions. Amazing. But you can call us at 833-GLD-ZANG or 833-453-9264. We are all here to be of service. We have a sound money strategy, but we're coming out with, we're shooting for right after the first of the year. Don't hold me to this, but we're shooting for it, to have a new mantra channel come out, helping people learn to develop those new skills and what they can do to be more self-sufficient and independent, because we have to be able to say no.
Exactly. Lynette, thank you very much. And everyone, you heard her. Don't get scared, get motivated, and take action.
Yep. Come together in community. There's strength in numbers.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.